Open fire with an MG42 and your life could be measured in minutes, sometimes seconds. That was the grim reality for German machine gunners in World War II. They carried one of the deadliest weapons of the war, a gun so fearsome, Allied soldiers nicknamed it, quote, Hitler's buzzsaw. But the same qualities that made the MG42 so effective also made its crews the most hunted men on the battlefield. To understand why, you have to go back to how it was born. In the First World War, German armies relied on the MG08, an enormous water-cooled machine gun that sat on sled mounts and spat bullets at 400 to 500 rounds per minute. It was devastating in defense, mowing down Allied troops in no man's land. But it was also huge, heavy, and slow. That worked in trench warfare. It didn't fit the new German vision of war: mobility, speed, combined arms. Between the wars, Germany looked for a new kind of machine gun. The MG13 was a step forward, but production was limited. The breakthrough came in the 1930s with the MG34. This was the world's first true general-purpose machine gun. It could be used on a bipod as a light machine gun, mounted on a tripod for sustained fire, or stuck in a tank or aircraft. It was accurate, deadly, and flexible. But there was a problem. The MG34 was a masterpiece of machining. Polished steel, precision parts, tight tolerances, it worked brilliantly in clean conditions, but mud, dust, and snow jammed it. Worse, it took too much time and skill to produce. As the war dragged on and German industry strained under Allied bombing, they needed something simpler. That's where the MG42 came in. Designed by Werner Gruner and manufactured by the Grossfuss company, the MG42 was Germany's answer to industrial war. Instead of polished machining, it used stamped steel parts, cheap, fast, and easy to produce. A single MG42 could be made in half the time of an MG34 with less steel and by semi-skilled labor. Introduced in 1942, it didn't just replace the MG34, it became the backbone of German infantry. By the end of the war, over 408,000 MG42s had been built. Every squad, every platoon, every defensive line seemed to have one. On paper, the MG42 looked like a light machine gun. In practice, it was a monster. It was chambered for the 7.92 by 57mm Mauser, the standard German rifle round, giving it the same punch as the infantry's bolt-action rifles. At 11.6 kilograms with its bipod, it was just light enough to be carried across the battlefield while still sturdy enough to deliver steady fire. But what set it apart was its terrifying rate of fire. The MG42 spat out around 1,200 rounds per minute, roughly double the speed of most Allied guns, with some models climbing as high as 1,500. It didn't sound like a machine gun at all. To Allied soldiers, the roar was a continuous ripping noise, like a buzzsaw chewing through timber, and many swore they were under attack from multiple weapons when in reality it was just one. Feeding such a weapon was a logistical task in itself. The gun could take 50-round belts packed into drums for mobility, or longer continuous belts in defensive positions. Either way, it tore through ammunition so quickly that an entire squad was often dedicated to keeping it supplied. And then there was the heat. Overheating was inevitable at that rate of fire, so the MG42 was fitted with a quick-change barrel system. A trained gunner could swap out a glowing barrel for a cool one in as little as just under 10 seconds, then keep firing before the enemy even realized the pause. Finally, its versatility added to the legend. On the bipod, it was a portable squad weapon. Mounted on the heavy Lafette tripod with optics, it became a sustained fire platform that could dominate entire fields of battle. The result was simple. One weapon that could move with infantry, hold ground like artillery, and terrify anyone caught in its sights. Allied soldiers often thought they were under fire from multiple guns when it was just one MG42. That meant the sound wasn't just noise, it was psychological warfare. The ripping cloth chatter of the MG42 struck fear into attackers. US and British soldiers reported that the moment they heard it, they dove for cover. In training, American GIs even played recordings of the MG42 to prepare themselves for the shock. But that sound was a double-edged sword. It also gave away the gunner's position. Once an MG42 opened fire, every Allied rifle, mortar and artillery piece zeroed in on it. That's why MG42 crews often had life expectancies measured in moments. The MG42 had solved Germany's industrial and tactical problems because it was cheap, reliable and devastating. But it also created a curse for the men behind it. The moment they pulled the trigger, every enemy within earshot knew exactly where they were. Snipers waited for them. Mortars hunted them. artillery targeted them. Unlike American or British squads, which were built around riflemen with the machine gunner's support, the German squad revolved around its MG42. A typical late-war squad had about 10 men, one gunner, one assistant gunner, a couple of ammo carriers, and the rest riflemen. But all of them existed to keep the machine gun firing. That's why MG42 gunners had some of the shortest life expectancies in the war. They were both the most valuable and the most expendable men in a German squad. The riflemen weren't the main killers. They were the shield, scouts, and resupply chain for the MG42. The assistant gunner carried spare barrels and changed them during battle. Ammo carriers lugged heavy belts across muddy fields. Everyone else was there to protect the crew while they poured fire into the enemy. That doctrine made sense. One MG42 could unleash as much firepower as an entire platoon of Allied rifles. With overlapping fields of fire, a handful of German squads could stop a much larger enemy force in its tracks, but it also made the gun, and the men behind it, an irresistible target for Allied soldiers. The moment it opened up, the battlefield shifted. Snipers looked for the flash. Mortar teams adjusted their tubes. Tank crews called in coordinates for artillery. The Germans joked that the MG42 was both a weapon and a beacon. Pull the trigger, and you had maybe a few minutes before the enemy zeroed in. That's why machine gunners moved constantly, set up fallback positions, and fired short bursts before relocating. Even so, the casualty rates were brutal. A gunner had the most dangerous job in the squad. His assistant, the man swapping barrels and feeding belts, was almost as vulnerable. When a position was overrun, the first soldiers to be shot were always the machine gun crew. Allied infantry were trained to take them out first. Without the MG42, the rest of the squad was just men with bolt-action rifles. There are endless stories from veterans about the life expectancy of MG42 crews. In Normandy, American officers told their men, quote, "Find the machine gun, kill the machine gunner first." In the east, Soviet infantry would swarm MG nests, throwing grenades until the crew was dead, no matter the cost. German veterans later recalled the sheer pressure of being a gunner. One described it as, quote, "holding the fate of your squad in your hands, while the enemy holds you in their sights." Another said simply, quote, "when the gun spoke, death came looking for us." The casualty rates reflected that. In some divisions, MG gunners suffered higher losses than officers. They were too valuable to hide, too noisy to ignore, and too deadly to leave alive. But being targeted by Allied soldiers wasn't the only thing that made the job exhausting. Normally, an MG42 with a bipod weighed around 11.6 kilograms, but add in spare barrels, ammo belts, and a tripod for sustained fire, and the crew could be hauling over 100 pounds of gear. Marching across fields, climbing hills, or retreating under fire, the machine gunners were weighed down like pack animals. Heat was another enemy. The gun's rate of fire meant barrels overheated after just a couple of belts. Crews carried asbestos gloves to swap them out, often with bullets flying overhead. Too slow, and the gun warped or jammed. Too fast, and you burned your hands. And the ammunition, so much ammunition. A single gun could chew through thousands of rounds in a single battle. That meant endless resupply trips, often under fire. If the ammo carriers went down, the gun became useless. Even knowing all that, Allied soldiers feared the MG42 to the very end. American GIs told stories of hitting the dirt the instant they heard its buzzsaw chatter. British troops joked grimly that it fired, quote, faster than you could swear. Soviet infantry called it, quote, the linoleum cutter. It wasn't just the volume of bullets, it was the way it changed battles. A single MG42, dug into a hedgerow or a ruined building, could hold up an entire company for hours. Clearing it often required artillery, tanks, or suicidal charges. And that meant every German squad, no matter how depleted, was still dangerous if its MG42 was intact. The MG42 didn't disappear with the Third Reich. After the war, its design lived on. NATO's MG3 is essentially the same gun, rechambered for 7.62 NATO, and it's still in service today. The American M60 borrowed its feed system. The Belgian FN-MAG copied its trigger group. Even now, armies around the world echo the lessons of the MG42. High firepower, quick barrels, belt-fed systems. But its legacy isn't just technical, it's human. The MG42 made heroes and corpses of the men who carried it. For every veteran who praised its reliability, there were countless others who never came home cut down because the weapon made them the most dangerous and most obvious target on the battlefield. So why did MG42 gunners die first? Because the gun was too good. It was the centerpiece of German tactics, the loudest voice in battle, and the most terrifying weapon to face. That made it invaluable to their own side, and enemy number one to everyone else. Every burst of fire announced both dominance and doom, and the men who pulled the trigger, no matter how skilled or brave, carried a death sentence as heavy as the gun itself. If you found this breakdown interesting, make sure to check out our other breakdowns on the effect of weapons and their roles in wars. And don't forget, drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.